The hum of the private jet's engines was more than just a sound to Julian Vance. It was the lullaby of his life. For a decade, it had meant power, precision, and control. As the CEO of Vance Industries, his name was a headline, and his decisions shifted markets. His personal life? A fortress. He was flying back from Tokyo, a deal just signed that would secure his empire for another generation. But as the jet descended into JFK, none of that mattered. A storm was brewing, and it wasn't in the sky. The moment he stepped onto the tarmac, flanked by security, the world buckled. The press was there, a pack of ravenous reporters, barely held back by a thin line of airport security. This was wrong. His arrivals were always sterile, private. Something was definitely wrong. And then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, with wide, terrified eyes and a mane of dark, messy hair, broke through the line. She was a blur of pink and denim, a tiny missile of desperation hurtling straight for him. Security moved to intercept, but she was impossibly fast, fueled by a purpose that defied her size. She skidded to a halt just inches from his $1,000 shoes, her tiny chest heaving. Then she spoke, her voice small but piercingly clear, cutting through the airport drone and shattering Julian's carefully built world. "Daddy!" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed like a sudden thunderstorm. Julian froze, his blood turning to ice. Daddy! Impossible! He didn't have a child. He didn't have anyone. He looked down at the girl, his face a mask of cold fury and confusion. Who was this child? What was this sick public game? "I don't know you," he said, his voice clipped and brutal. He watched the hope in her eyes flicker out, replaced by a wave of hurt that was devastating to see. But before she could crumble, she lifted her small, determined chin. "Yes, you do," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Mommy said you would. She said you would remember." The crowd surged. His security team moved in, forming a wall. Julian's mind was a whirlwind of denial and a strange, unwelcome flicker of something, a memory. A ghost. His loyal assistant, Arthur, was already at his side, his expression grim. As a guard gently tried to lead the little girl away, Arthur leaned in. "Sir," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Look," he gestured subtly. A single dark strand of hair had fallen from the child's head onto the shoulder of Julian's suit. With the stealth of a spy, Arthur pinched the strand and tucked it into a small, sterile bag he seemed to produce from nowhere. "We'll run the test. We'll know in 12 hours. Julian didn't answer. He just stared at the girl being swallowed by the chaos, her small, heartbroken face branded into his memory. In that moment, Julian Vance, the man who had everything, felt the first crack in the foundation of his life. He knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that nothing would ever be the same. The black leather of the Rolls-Royce felt cold and unforgiving as Julian sank into the seat. The door shut with a heavy thud, sealing him in a cocoon of silence, a jarring contrast to the pandemonium on the tarmac. The tinted windows turned the flashing cameras into a silent, frantic ballet. He didn't watch. He just stared straight ahead, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Find her," he commanded, his voice dangerously low. "Find the woman who sent that child. I want to know who she is, where she came from, and what game she's playing. And I want it now, Arthur." Arthur, sitting opposite him, just nodded. His face was a mask of calm efficiency, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern for the man he'd served for 15 years. "The DNA test is on its way to the lab. Priority rush. We've also got teams tracking passenger manifests and running facial recognition on the airport's CCTV. The girl didn't just appear out of thin air. Someone brought her." Julian's jaw tightened. "Mommy said you would remember." He spat the words out like they were poison. "Remember what? A one-night stand I've forgotten? A calculated ploy for a piece of the Vance fortune?" His mind raced through a Rolodex of forgettable encounters. None of them fit. There was no one. Except one. A ghost from 5 years ago. a memory he had violently suppressed, buried under layers of work and cynicism. Elena. The name was a whisper in the locked vault of his heart. Elena Petrova. He shook his head, a sharp, angry motion. No, it couldn't be her. He had made sure of that. He had destroyed that possibility himself. He had believed the lies, embraced the betrayal, and cut her out of his life like a cancer. She was gone. The car purred through the city, a silent beast carrying its wounded master back to its cage of glass and steel. His penthouse was a monument to his success and his isolation, vast, minimalist, and so sterile it felt more like an art gallery than a home. He strode to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline a glittering tapestry of his ambition. But he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing a pair of wide, trusting eyes, a small chin held high, a flicker of a face from his past, a face he had once loved with a terrifying intensity. His phone buzzed. His stepsister, Isabella. He ignored it. It buzzed again. With a grunt of irritation, he answered, "What is it, Isabella?" "Julian, darling, I just saw the news. Are you all right? It's everywhere. Some dreadful little girl ambushing you. It's just ghastly. You must be appalled." Her voice was a syrupy blend of concern and morbid curiosity. Isabella Vance was a creature of high society, polished and beautiful, with a core of steel. They shared a father, not a mother, and a rivalry that simmered just beneath the surface. She ran the Vance Foundation, a position that gave her status and influence she wielded with practiced ease. "I'm handling it," Julian said flatly. "Of course you are," she purred. "But honestly, the audacity. Some woman is clearly making a desperate play for your money. You have to let the lawyers crush them. Make an example. You can't show weakness, Julian. Not now." "Thank you for your concern, Isabella," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I have it under control." He hung up before she could reply. Isabella's brand of support always felt more like a threat. She was right about one thing, though. He couldn't show weakness. The corporate world was filled with sharks, and many of them shared his last name, always circling, waiting for a drop of blood in the water. Today, a child had just thrown in a bucketful. He poured himself a whiskey, but the amber liquor did nothing to warm the chill in his bones. He was Julian Vance. He was in control. This was just a problem to be solved, a hostile takeover of his personal life. He would identify the threat, assess the damage, and neutralize it. That's what he did. But as he stared into his reflection in the dark glass, the face of a 5-year-old girl stared back, and for the first time in a very long time, Julian Vance felt a tremor of fear. The fear that this wasn't a problem he could solve. This was a reckoning.
5 years earlier, Julian Vance was a different man. Still driven, still ambitious, but there were cracks in his armor. He was on the cusp of the biggest deal of his life, a merger that would make Vance Industries a global titan. The pressure was immense. He lived and breathed the deal, working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a relentless fear of failure. And then he met Elena Petrova. It was at a university fundraiser. He was just there to make an appearance, shake some hands, and leave. He hated these events, the empty chatter, the grasping hands. He was standing in a corner, nursing a glass of champagne, when he saw her. She wasn't schmoozing or trying to catch anyone's eye. She was standing before a student art exhibition, completely lost in a chaotic, vibrant, abstract painting. An art history student, he'd later learn, with a mind as brilliant as the colors on the canvas. She had a cascade of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost less than his tie, but she wore it with an elegance that made every other woman in the room look overdressed. He found himself walking towards her, pulled by a force he couldn't explain. "It's chaos," he said by way of introduction. She didn't look at him, her eyes still on the painting. "It's not chaos," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's passion. It's what happens when you pour everything you are onto a canvas. Most people are too afraid to be this honest." She finally turned to him, her gaze direct, intelligent, and utterly unimpressed. "You probably think it's a bad investment." He was taken aback. Nobody talked to him like that. "I think it's loud." A small smile played on her lips. Good art is supposed to be loud. It's supposed to wake you up. And just like that, she'd woken him up. Their romance was a whirlwind, a fire that tore through the sterile landscape of his life. She was the exact opposite of his world. She didn't care about his money or his name. She cared about art, books, and late-night talks about everything and nothing. She took him to hole-in-the-wall jazz clubs and sprawling flea markets. She taught him how to see the world not as a series of transactions, but as a canvas of possibilities. For the first time, Julian felt like he was actually living. He fell completely and irrevocably in love. It was terrifying. He told her things he'd never told anyone about the crushing weight of his father's expectations, his fear that he was just an empty suit. She listened, not with pity, but with a fierce, unwavering belief in the man she saw beneath the armor. Their spot became a secluded bench overlooking the river. It was there, one crisp autumn evening, that he gave her a small, intricately carved wooden bird he'd whittled himself, a hobby from his boyhood. "It's a sparrow," he told her. "They're small, but they're resilient. They can fly anywhere." She traced its delicate wings, her eyes shining. "It's beautiful, Julian. I have to go to Shanghai, the final stage of the merger. When I get back, we'll build our own life. Anywhere you want. I promise you, Elena. Just wait for me." "I promise," she whispered. "I'll be right here. I'll wait." But he never came back to her. While Julian was in Shanghai, another war was being waged at home. Isabella, his stepsister, had watched their romance with growing jealousy. She saw Elena as a threat, a distraction pulling Julian away from the Vance legacy, a legacy she intended to have a big piece of. So she set a trap, simple and cruel. Using her position at the foundation, she worked with a disgruntled IT tech to create a false digital trail. Emails, encrypted files, bank transfers, all meticulously crafted to look like Elena was selling insider information about the merger to a rival. It was the ultimate betrayal, designed to hit Julian where he was most vulnerable, his loyalty and his company. The day Julian returned from Shanghai, triumphant and ready to lay the world at Elena's feet, Isabella was waiting. She played the part of the heartbroken sister, laying a file on his desk with grave sorrow. "Julian, I'm so sorry," her voice trembling. "There's something you need to see. I'm so sorry." He opened it. Inside was the irrefutable evidence, the emails, the financial records. It was a masterpiece of deception. Julian's world turned to ash. The love, the trust, the promises, all of it felt like a lie. She hadn't loved him, she had used him. It was the only explanation his cold, transactional world would accept. He didn't question it. The betrayal was too immense. He went to the apartment he had just bought for them, his heart a block of ice. He found her there, surrounded by boxes, a smile on her face that died the second he saw his hail. "Julian, you're back. I was just—" He threw the file on the table. "Explain this." She paled as she looked at the documents. What is this? Julian, this isn't real. You have to believe me." But he couldn't. The evidence was too convincing, his hurt too deep. "Believe you?" he sneered with a cruelty he didn't know he had. "Believe the woman who was sleeping with me while selling my company's future? How stupid do you think I am?" "No, Julian, please." Tears streamed down her face. "Someone is setting me up. I love you." "Love?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You were a dalliance, a temporary distraction. Now you're a liability." Each word was a knife, and he watched them land, watched her flinch, watched the light in her eyes die. He was burning the bridge between them, so the memory could never hurt him again. The authorities, tipped off by an anonymous source, arrived moments later. As they led a sobbing, bewildered Elena away, she looked back at him, her eyes pleading. But he just turned away, his face a mask of stone. The trial was a formality. With the evidence stacked against her and Julian Vance's silent condemnation, she was convicted of corporate espionage. Julian buried himself in his work, becoming the cold, ruthless CEO everyone expected him to be.
The wooden sparrow sat on Julian's desk, a small accusation amidst the sleek chrome and glass. It was a relic from a life he'd tried to erase, a tangible piece of a past that now refused to stay buried. Why send this? A symbol of their promise? A corporate spy would send a lawyer with demands, not a child with a fairy tale. A gold digger would leverage the child for a payout, not a mission of faith. The narrative he had clung to for 5 years, the one that painted him as the victim, was unraveling. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice sharp with new urgency, "I want you to open a new investigation into Elena Petrova's case. I want everything, every piece of evidence, every witness, and do it discreetly. No one, especially not Isabella, is to know." "Right away, sir," Arthur replied, his tone suggesting he'd been waiting for this order. As Arthur set the wheels in motion, Julian focused on the more terrifying task, being a father. Lily was a small, quiet presence in his vast penthouse. He had a room filled with toys, but she spent most of her time shadowing him, her stuffed elephant clutched in her hand, watching him with those perceptive eyes. He tried to connect. He, a man who commanded boardrooms, was clueless with a 5-year-old. He bought her ice cream. She ate it politely. He put cartoons on a screen the size of a wall. She grew restless. One afternoon, he was on a conference call and noticed Lily at his desk, scribbling on a notepad. After the call, he walked over. She wasn't scribbling. She was drawing the city skyline with surprising detail. Did your mommy teach you how to draw?" he asked gently. Lily nodded. "Mommy's an artist. She made beautiful pictures, even when the room was gray. She said art is how you make the world what you want it to be, not just what it is." Another piece of the puzzle slid into place. The Elena he knew was a passionate artist. The woman he'd condemned was a cold spy. The two images were impossible to reconcile. Meanwhile, news of Lily's existence had sent shockwaves through the Vance empire. Isabella arrived at the penthouse unannounced, a vision in Chanel, her face a mask of concern. "Julian, darling, we need to talk about this situation," she said, gesturing vaguely at Lily. "The board is in an uproar. Our stock took a hit. A secret love child. It looks unstable." "She is not a situation, Isabella. She is my daughter," Julian replied coldly. Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Of course, but she is also the daughter of a convicted felon, a woman who tried to ruin this family. This is just the second act of her plan. What's to stop her from using the child to extort us?" Julian felt a flash of anger. "That's enough." "Is it?" Isabella pressed on, her voice dropping. "Think about it. The child has been raised by a criminal. She needs stability. The Vance Foundation has resources. We could quietly place her in an excellent boarding school, away from the press. It would be the best thing for her, and for the company." He saw it then, clear as day. It was a power play. Isabella wasn't concerned about Lily. She was trying to take control of Julian's only heir. The thought was revolting. "No," he said, the word a final command. "She is staying with me." End of discussion. Isabella's mask of concern slipped, revealing a flash of fury before being replaced by a sugary smile. "Of course, Julian, you're the father." But her eyes held a glint of challenge, a promise of a battle to come. 2 days later, lawyers representing an anonymous, concerned party filed for temporary custody of Lily, citing her father's unstable lifestyle and her mother's criminal history. The anonymous party was, of course, Isabella, using the foundation as a legal shield. Isabella had just made a grave mistake. She thought she was attacking his weakness. Instead, she had just given him something to fight for. He had already failed his daughter once. He would die before he failed her again. He had to find the truth, not just for Elena, but for Lily. The conference room was silent, the air thick with tension. Julian had called an emergency meeting of the board, including his retired father and, of course, Isabella. She sat opposite him, looking poised, assuming this was about damage control for the custody battle. She thought she had him cornered. She was wrong. "Thank you all for coming," Julian began, his voice calm. "For the past 5 years, this company has operated under the belief that we were the victims of corporate espionage by a woman named Elena Petrova." He paused, his eyes landing on Isabella. "We believed she used her personal relationship with me to sell sensitive data. This belief was based on evidence brought to my attention by my stepsister, Isabella." Isabella gave a slight, sorrowful nod. "A painful discovery for all of us," she said softly. "Indeed," Julian said, his voice hardening, "which is why I hired an independent cybersecurity team to re-examine the case. I wanted to be certain, given the new circumstances." He gestured to Arthur, and the screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "The emails supposedly proving Elena's guilt were sent from an IP address masked to look like it came from her apartment," Julian narrated. "However, our team traced it back to its original source, a computer in the main office of the Vance Foundation." Isabella's smile